From the earliest centuries of Japan's formation, the sword grew into a symbol whose meaning extended far beyond the reach of steel. Because in every noble household, the moment a child first touched a wooden training blade, an invisible bridge was built between the fragile innocence of youth and the grave responsibility of adulthood. In the quiet rooms of samurai residences, where tatami absorbed every step and paper walls let in the soft, shimmering light of dawn, the sword rested not as an object of war, but as a sacred embodiment of lineage, dignity, and inner purity. When a young heir participated in the first ceremony of receiving a blade, initially light and symbolic, crafted only to teach posture and respect, an entire world of expectations breathed around him, as if ancestors whispered through the polished surface, urging him to maintain the unbroken chain of honor. With time, when the rite of adulthood came and a true sword was finally placed into young hands, the weight of the steel revealed a new truth. Power was only granted to those capable of bearing its moral burden. The katana, over generations, ceased to be viewed merely as a weapon, for its curved edge demanded that every warrior recognize something greater than personal skill, a spiritual law that united the living with those who had already passed into the realm of memory. The sword was spoken of as a mirror, reflecting the purity or darkness within its owner. Its creation required not only craftsmanship, but a state of mind that accepted the world as a delicate balance between life and death. For the samurai, the blade became a silent companion in moments of solitude, a witness to vows, a guardian of family honor, and a reminder that the path of the warrior was impossible without inner discipline. Even in peaceful times, when the clans did not march to war, the sword remained close, resting in scabbards lacquered with the colors of the house, reminding its owner that control over the self was the highest form of mastery. In this atmosphere of reverence and calm austerity, the sword became a living presence in the household, treated as a guest of higher nature, wrapped carefully in silk, placed on stands with the edge turned upward to symbolize readiness not only for battle, but for truth. The samurai who approached it in the morning did so with a quiet bow, acknowledging an ancient pact between spirit and steel, a pact forged long before his birth and destined to outlive him. The cult of the sword bound entire generations together, shaping an identity where valor was inseparable from introspection. And as dusk settled over the lands of Japan, elders often told tales of how blades carried the memories of victories, failures, and sacrifices, preserving them in silence until the next bearer was ready to understand their weight. Yet within this sacred stillness, beneath the calm respect surrounding the katana, questions quietly stirred about how such a revered object emerged from primitive beginnings, and what transformations allowed a simple piece of metal to evolve into the most symbolic weapon of the East. A mystery whose roots awaited revelation in the story of its origin.
Across the shifting centuries of early Japan, long before the elegance of the katana took its iconic form, the weapon that would one day shape the destiny of warriors began as a simple extension of necessity, forged first from bronze and later from the newly mastered iron that arrived through distant shores. Straight blades from continental Asia entered the archipelago, carried by traders, wanderers, and early settlers, their shapes rigid and utilitarian, offering only a faint echo of the refinement that would later define the soul of the samurai. In those times, the forging process lacked the spiritual resonance found in later eras, for the smiths of the ancient period were more concerned with durability than inner meaning. Yet even then, one could sense an awakening interest in the possibilities hidden within metal, as if the land itself anticipated the rise of a new kind of weapon and a new understanding of craftsmanship. As clans consolidated power and regional conflicts intensified, the shortcomings of straight swords revealed themselves on the battlefield, where quick mounted engagements and rapid slashing motions demanded a blade that could respond with fluidity rather than stiffness. This pressure slowly reshaped the craft, guiding it toward the decisive innovation that would define Japanese metallurgy. Legend tells of the master Amakuni, who, observing the breakage of straight blades after a devastating campaign, secluded himself with unwavering devotion inside his forge, refusing to accept defeat. Through countless nights of heat, hammering, and prayer, he discovered that a subtly curved blade possessed far greater resilience and cutting power, allowing swift strikes executed with a single smooth motion. Whether myth or truth, the story captured the essence of the transformation, for around this period Japanese swords began evolving into curved, single-edged weapons, the ancestors of the katana. By the Han and Kamakura eras, the sword reached a level of sophistication unmatched in previous generations. Tachi swords, longer and worn edged down by mounted warriors, dominated the battlefield with their graceful arcs, while the emergence of the katana, worn edge up and designed for rapid drawing, offered a new dimension of speed and control, especially in close combat. Alongside these major forms appeared the wakizashi, a short companion blade, and together, in the daisho pair, they symbolized the social status and personal identity of the samurai. The presence of two swords was more than practical. It embodied the harmony between long range and intimate distance, between outer duty and inner resolve, between the public face of a warrior and the private discipline that defined his core. The evolution of Japanese swords did not occur in isolation, but grew alongside the philosophy of the warrior class, mirroring their values and their sense of aesthetic perfection. Every new shape reflected changes in armor, tactics, and the very understanding of what constituted honor on the battlefield. With each generation, the blades became sharper, lighter, and more attuned to the rhythm of combat, while their appearance increasingly reflected spiritual principles. And as the craftsmanship reached its golden age, whispers began to circulate that these swords were no longer mere objects, but vessels in which spirits resided, a belief that prepared the way for the mystical and ritual dimensions that surrounded the forging of the katana, a world where steel was shaped by divine forces as much as by human hands.
In the quiet sanctuaries of traditional forges, where shadows trembled against earthen walls and the rhythmic breath of the bellows created a pulse like that of a living creature, the creation of a sword unfolded not as mere craft, but as a sacred dialogue between human intention and the unseen world of spirits. The belief that every blade housed the kami, a divine essence, transformed the work of blacksmiths into a form of worship, elevating them to a status that bordered on priesthood. Before a single hammer struck heated steel, the smith purified the space with ritual prayers, washed his hands in cold water, and invoked the protection of Inari-sama, the guardian deity believed to favor perseverance, transformation, and the fire that both destroys and creates. Within this atmosphere of reverence, every spark that leapt from the glowing metal seemed like a fleeting messenger between the earthly and the sacred. The forging process itself unfolded with deliberate rhythm, each step accompanied by silence or chant, never haste, for the smith understood that the soul of the blade depended not only on technique, but on the purity of the mind guiding it. Layers of steel folded upon themselves again and again, as if gathering fragments of memory, until hundreds of thin laminations fused into a single, resilient core. The blade's curvature emerged naturally through quenching, an instant in which the heated metal cried out as it met cold water, releasing a sound that artisans described as the first breath of the sword's spirit. This moment was treated with awe, for it was believed that a sword with righteous intent cooled evenly, gaining a calm and benevolent kami, while one forged in anger or impatience risked inheriting a restless spirit capable of misfortune. Stories of legendary swordsmiths reinforce these beliefs. Masamune, the master known for blades of serene beauty, was said to imbue his creations with purity and restraint, producing weapons admired not only for sharpness, but for the peaceful energy they carried. His rival, Muramasa, by contrast, gained a reputation for forging blades that thirsted for blood, their spirits driven by wild, untamed force. Whether grounded in literal truth or symbolic morality, these contrasting legends expressed a deeper cultural conviction. A sword reflected the inner condition of its maker and owner, and thus possessed a destiny intertwined with the fates of those who wielded it. In samurai households, the reverence continued long after forging was complete. Blades were cleaned with ritual precision, wrapped in cloth, inspected under the soft glow of oil lamps, and stored with their edges turned upward to signify readiness and respect. The sword served not only in battle, but also in rites marking birth, adulthood, and death, as if guiding the warrior through the entire journey of life. Families sometimes entrusted ancestral blades to temples, where monks performed blessings, affirming that these objects bridged the mortal world and the realm of spirits. Yet within this tapestry of devotion and symbolism, a question lingered about how such revered objects were used in the hands of warriors, not just as sacred relics, but as instruments of disciplined combat. And as this question deepened, attention turned inevitably to the schools where the dance of the blade became a lifelong path of mastery, revealing an entirely different chapter in the story of the sword.
As the sword gained spiritual stature, the discipline of its use grew into an art that shaped not only the warrior's body, but the architecture of his mind. And throughout Japan, countless dojos emerged where the quiet echo of wooden floors carried the weight of generations. In these austere spaces, lit only by narrow windows that allowed thin slices of daylight to fall across training mats, young samurai entered with bowed heads, aware that the threshold marked a separation from ordinary life. The master, often seated in silence before the Kamidana shrine, offered no welcoming gesture, for his presence alone radiated an expectation of discipline. Every movement inside the dojo, from adjusting the obi to placing the bokken on the floor, unfolded with controlled precision, and this discipline became the first lesson before a single technique was taught. Kenjutsu grew not as a uniform art, but as a constellation of schools, each shaped by the temperament, experience, and philosophy of its founder. Shinkage Ryu emphasized the subtlety of timing, teaching that true victory arose from anticipating the opponent's intention before the strike even began. Ito Ryu, by contrast, focused on the dominance of a single decisive cut, a belief that purity of technique outweighed complexity. Yagyu Ryu fused strategy with spiritual understanding, offering lessons wherein sword movement mirrored inner clarity, encouraging practitioners to dissolve fear before entering combat. These traditions did not compete for supremacy, but coexisted like branches of the same ancient tree, for each revealed a different perspective on how a warrior should navigate danger without allowing emotion to corrupt judgment. Outside the dojo walls, the mastery of these schools manifested in journeys that samurai undertook across provinces. Clothed in traveling garments and carrying their swords wrapped against the dust of the road, they sought out teachers whose reputations traveled farther than armies. Duels, often arranged without spectators, unfolded not as chaotic clashes, but as moments where time seemed suspended, the air thick with concentration. The faint scrape of sandals across earth, the whisper of cloth, the slow exhalation before the first step, these subtle signs often determined victory before steel even met steel. Masters rarely boasted about their victories, for the purpose of kenjutsu lay not in proving dominance, but in refining spirit through confrontation. A single duel could determine the course of a warrior's life, not because of fame, but because it revealed the truth of his character when confronted with mortality. Within the dojo, the passing of technique from teacher to student resembled a ritual carried by trust rather than ceremony. Some teachings were whispered privately after evening practice, shared only with those deemed ready, while others required years of silent repetition until the body absorbed them beyond conscious thought. The secrecy of these lessons preserved the uniqueness of each school and protected knowledge from being diluted by unworthy hands. Kenjutsu became a lifelong pursuit where every swing of the sword polished not only technique but the warrior's perception of the world, teaching that clarity in combat was inseparable from clarity in life. And as this discipline deepened, a particular method of drawing the sword in a single fluid motion began to emerge, hinting at a new evolution in the relationship between warrior and blade, an evolution that would redefine the very concept of readiness. Within the dim corridors of the warrior's path, where the slightest hesitation could mean the thin boundary between survival and final breath, a profound realization spread across generations of samurai. Mastery of the sword began not at the moment of contact, but in the instant before the blade even left its sheath. From this understanding emerged iajutsu, an art that demanded a level of awareness so refined that thought itself became an obstacle.
The practice transformed the simple motion of drawing a sword into a complete expression of perception, intuition, and unbroken focus. In training halls where incense drifted in slow clouds and sunlight cast elongated reflections along polished floors, the practitioners knelt with eyes half lowered, gripping the scabbard lightly as if the sword were an extension of breath rather than metal. The stillness preceding the strike became its own realm of study, a moment in which the entire universe contracted into the gap between heartbeat and motion. The essence of iajutsu lay in a response that preceded conscious decision, a reflex shaped by endless repetition until body and spirit acted as one. Warriors trained for years to sense the slightest disturbance, a shift in air, the imperceptible lean of an opponent, the flicker of intent behind a gaze. Their practice combined muscular precision with an inner clarity cultivated through meditation, for only a mind free of tension could command such immediacy. When the sword flashed from its sheath with a motion too swift for unaided eyes to follow, the cut was not merely a strike, but an affirmation that the practitioner existed fully in the present moment. The blade returned to the scabbard with equal grace, completing the cycle with a fluid finality that reflected harmony rather than aggression. Legends of renowned swordsmen reinforced the awe surrounding this discipline. Miyamoto Musashi, whose reputation traveled like a storm across the provinces, embodied the principle of spontaneous action. His duels, often resolved with shocking speed, became testimony to a mind untouched by doubt at the decisive instant. Other masters, known less by name and more by the tales surrounding them, spent years wandering remote mountain paths, refining their technique in solitude until their reactions felt guided by forces beyond rational explanation. In these stories, iajutsu became less a fighting method and more a doorway into an elevated consciousness where observation, movement, and outcome merged seamlessly. As peaceful eras dawned and open conflict receded, the raw combat nature of iajutsu gradually evolved into aido, a spiritual refinement of the same principles, focusing on mindfulness rather than mortal struggle. Practitioners moved through kata that traced elegant arcs in the air, their motions slow yet unwavering, embodying a discipline concerned not with defeating enemies, but with cutting through illusion and ignorance. The training halls that once echoed with the sharp ring of steel began to resonate with quieter rhythms, yet the essence remained unchanged. The sword served as a mirror, reflecting the truth within its wielder. But even as the practice gained a contemplative dimension, questions mounted about how the ancient techniques of battlefield duels would survive in the changing tide of history, and what form the legacy of the samurai blade would assume as Japan stepped toward a modern age shaped by peace rather than war.
When the upheavals of the feudal age settled, and the swords of warriors slowly grew quiet in their lacquered scabbards, Japan entered a new chapter in which battlefields no longer shaped the identity of the samurai, yet the essence of their discipline refused to vanish. The sword remained a presence that history could not discard, preserved in the memory of clans, enshrined in family alcoves, and passed down as more than relics, as reminders of a worldview built on balance, dignity, and steadfastness. In the towns that grew around former castle districts, dojos reopened not as military academies but as sanctuaries, where the teachings of kenjutsu continued to govern the rhythm of everyday life. The clatter of wooden swords replaced the once fearsome ring of steel, and the spirit of training began to shift from survival to refinement, from triumph over enemies to mastery over oneself. As modern institutions emerged and Western influences reshaped the nation, the ancient schools faced a new challenge, preserving the heart of their tradition without clinging to the violence that once defined their existence. It was in this turbulent transformation that kendo took shape, a discipline that retained the posture, strikes, and mental focus of the old sword arts while translating them into a practice meant for spiritual cultivation. The bokken, once a tool for battle preparation, became a medium for understanding form, while the shinai, a bamboo weapon designed to absorb impact, allowed practitioners to engage with full intensity without the mortal consequences their ancestors faced.
Protective armor, known as bogu, enveloped the warriors in a new ritual. The donning of the men, kote, do, and tare, became an act that recalled ancient readiness, yet carried a sense of safety that enabled deeper exploration of rhythm and precision. Within kendo halls, the soundscape transformed into something unique. The sharp exhalation marking an oncoming strike, the crack of bamboo upon armor, and the shouts of ki resonating like echoes from distant eras. Ranking systems replaced battlefield achievements, yet each advancement required a profound test of character, mirroring the values that once defined the samurai class. The modern practitioner, though no longer facing mortal duels at dawn, confronted an opponent nonetheless. The restless mind that clouded intention, the hesitation that dulled technique, the pride that disrupted clarity. Kendo became a world where ancient demands lived on not through bloodshed, but through discipline, and where the blade's legacy survived as a philosophy guiding everyday conduct. In this lineage of transformation, the katana itself retained its symbolic power. Museums displayed masterworks with reverence, while shrines safeguarded blades believed to house protective spirits. Collectors studied the patterns of folded steel, tracing the fingerprints of long-departed smiths, and martial artists bowed before swords not out of nostalgia, but out of acknowledgement that true mastery begins with humility. Even in modern Japan, where technology eclipses the old rhythms of travel and communication, the image of the sword persists in literature, ceremony, and the quiet imagination of those who still wander the path of discipline. It endures as a reminder that the warrior's spirit is not measured by conquest, but by the ability to confront the illusions that cloud perception. And so, the journey of the sword, from primitive bronze creations to sacred katana, from battlefield ferocity to meditative clarity, continues to influence generations far removed from the age of armor. The transformation from kenjutsu to kendo did not dilute the meaning of the blade. Instead, it revealed that its truest power resides not in cutting flesh, but in shaping character. For in the end, the ancient wisdom remains unchanged. The samurai sword cut through not only enemies, but also illusions, bearing the truth of the heart.